Audio? Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's just audio. All right.
Okay.
Are we live now?
Yes, I think we are. Okay, so let me see. I think we are live. We should be. It says live, but my computer's like messing up a lot, so hopefully it is.
Okay.
Let me see. Because I just Okay, perfect. We are live. I just checked and we're ready to go. Okay. So
Awesome.
let me introduce you. Hi everybody, welcome back to our first virtual hot topic on podcast. This is gonna be something different. We usually always talk about like topics going on, but we thought it would be fun to talk about podcasts. And my name is Daisy and I am part of the tri-institutional events team here at our campus. And then today we'll be discussing about podcasts and like how can we use podcasts right now and like to get connected with each other. With us today, we have Natalia Velez Ryan, who is an alumni from CU Denver and MSU, and we also have Dan. Can you like tell me how to say your name? I really don't want to mess it up.
Schaefer, Dan and Schaefer. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, you're good.
Who is a faculty here at CCD. So let's start with Natalia. Can you talk about us a little bit about yourself and your experience with podcast?
Yeah. So I am originally from Venezuela, been here in Denver for about 10 years. And like you said, I graduated from MSU Denver with a journalism degree and then got my master's in English at CU Denver. And so as part of my final portfolio project for my master's, I was working on a paper on the female gaze in horror film. And I thought this was like a really interesting topic that a lot of people could be interested in, but not a lot of people are going to sit down to like read a 20-page academic paper. So I thought that a podcast could be a really fun way to kind of talk about those same ideas in like a little bit more conversational way. So I created that podcast, Madeline Looks Back, with my friend and journalist Veronica Penny. And we're still doing that podcast today. We release episodes monthly. And then from that as well, I got the opportunity to create the podcast Culture Clash for the University of Colorado Denver for the English department, where we kind of talk about contemporary media, and it's been really fun.
Cool. Okay, perfect. And then, Dan, can you tell us something about yourself and like how you got into podcast?
Yeah. So my name's Dr. Dan Schaefer. I'm an assistant professor of journalism over at CCD. Let's see, I got my master's in journalism up at CU Boulder, and I've been messing around with podcasting for a really long time, and never really done broadcast or publish my own podcast, but I've helped other faculty, other students with their podcasts and setting those up. I'm originally from Michigan. I came out to Colorado 2002, so I've been here a couple years. And recently, just this semester, we've really, over at the journalism program at CCD, really tried to embrace all things digital. So we're doing podcasting, a website, a TV show, a lot of different mediums for telling stories. That's our main thing, is telling stories. So I really wanted to embrace podcasts. We started the just this semester the Bird on the Wire podcast about our focus this semester is student side hustles. So we have like Lyft drivers and event planners, people who resell shoes, and all these kind of crazy stories that they have when they do these side hustles. So we're probably behind Natalia in terms of development. We just kind of kicked things off, and with the virus and that whole craziness, it's taken longer to edit and actually do the interviews and that kind of thing. But it's definitely in the works.
Cool. Okay, cool. Okay,
yeah.
Well, before we start, I was going to say thank you for introducing yourself and sharing a bit about yourself, especially right now, like getting to know each other is really difficult and like staying connected with like the virus going on. We just want to say some like share some housekeeping items. Like if I'll start off with some questions, and then for both of you, and then it will then be open up to the audience to ask some questions as well. And then like if the audience has any comments or anything, please write them in the chat, and then I will ask them. I'll ask away. So
Okay.
then let's start with our questions. So for the first questions, this can go for both of you. So
Sure.
for those who are less familiar, can you tell us more about podcasts and like what is a podcast?
Natalia, I can start out, and you can tell me how I am going wrong. So podcast is, I'm probably going to go a little bit more technical than maybe I need to, but it's just a web page. That's all it is, and it has a series of audio files. They're typically audio, like MP3 files, audio files, and the web page is just set up. It's not really set up for humans to read it. It's really set up for computer programs. So you could read it, you can edit it. It's accessible in that way, but it's really made this web page is put up on a web server, and then other programs just access that URL. And every time you create a new episode, an audio file, it just adds another entry into this web page. So it's actually really simple. It's actually not casting out anything like broadcasting. It's actually just sitting up on a web server, and people actually come to that server. So it's a little bit different than like live stream. Like what we're doing now is actually broadcasting, or Spotify is, where you're streaming music or something. Does that mesh up with what you know, Natalia and Daisy?
Yeah, I guess what I would add is that on the storytelling side, that what I really love about podcasts is they can take so many different shapes and forms. So it can be fiction, it can be a musical, it can be journalism. So there's so much you can do with this way of sharing audio. And really, I think that conversations tend to be at the heart of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's conversation. It's much more conversational, and you can put whatever you want in those audio files. I mean, that's the stories, fiction, nonfiction. I mean, there's an incredible, rich, library of podcasts, and people usually download those episodes, and it's addictive, right? You get hooked on a story, and you want to follow it. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I was watching a podcast about like conspiracy theories, and there was one about like the Denver airport, and I was like, what? And like I started watching them, and then I saw like 5 episodes, and I'm like, I really should be studying. It got really good.
The nice thing about audio is at least you can do it like while you're riding your bike or cleaning or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the one advantage. I think a huge advantage over like YouTube and that kind of thing is that you can multitask, right? You can listen to it while you're mowing the lawn or washing dishes or that kind of thing. So it's I think it's a real advantage over other media where you have to focus on the show. So.
Okay, cool. Okay, next question. Can you talk more about what made you start your own podcast and some of the trials and tribulations you faced and stuff like that?
Natalia, you can take the lead on this one.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I felt like podcasting was a way to kind of share these ideas that in a way that wasn't quite as academic, that was more conversational, that is more accessible, that a lot of people could kind of relate to and have conversations around. And I started the podcast When Everyone Looks Back with my friend Veronica, like I mentioned, and she and I used to work together, so we kind of used to just sit across from each other and have these conversations all day anyway. And now we live in different states, so it's a really cool way for us to get together every month and kind of have these engaging, thoughtful conversations. And on the Culture Clash side, it's been really cool to kind of expand that to having conversations with students and professors. For our last episode on the best films of 2019, we had a student panel, which was so fun. And really the way that we envision Culture Clash is the kind of conversations you would have sitting for coffee with your friends, and just talking about, the last season of Game of Thrones, that kind of thing. So I've just found that it's a really great medium to do that and to share those ideas. And in terms of trials and tribulations, really, I would say that there's making your podcast, which is a ton of work, producing, editing, recording, but then there's this whole other side of marketing your podcast, of being on social media, of creating a website that just really takes a ton of work and time.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe I can tag on the end of this. Start with the end and then go from there. So for me, I'll start with the trials and tribulations. CCD, we wanted that we produced the Talon magazine, and it used to be called The Star, and it's our main print publication coming out of the journalism program. And when I came on in the fall, I just started as an assistant professor in the fall. I really wanted to, get us out of just print into digital. And so everything digital, podcasts, TVs, websites, everything that we can do to tell stories. And so the tribulations for me was actually more institutional, where I was trying to actually, set up a website that worked within our institution, that was managed and that kind of thing. So once that was set up in the fall, then the spring semester we could actually go forward and start creating content. So the reason I was writing down some notes, actually the reason I started the podcast, so this is a podcast called Bird on the Wire, because we're the City Hawks. That's our mascot. Is because I was teaching reporting, introduction to reporting, like Journalism 106. And I asked the students to write a story, right? And they seemed really reluctant to write an actual news story. But when I got them, when I asked them just to talk about the story, about the facts, and about interviewing some, they jumped right into it. So it was more accessible, right? They were able to jump in and start, like Natalia was saying, just have that conversation, and through that conversation, have the story kind of emerge. And so once I discovered that they were reluctant on the writing, but they were all in on the audio, it's like, we got to do a podcast. And so it's just been a matter of getting interviews set up, having students become comfortable with interviewing, because it can be uncomfortable to interview someone you don't know. It's very like we're doing this right now. I've never met you guys and through this video chat, but it's awesome, right? You get warmed up, and you start asking questions, and you start making sense of the topic and who this person is. And so once they started figuring out that, and we had the sort of a process in place, then things got a lot better. I wrote down, I really see podcasting as kind of a gateway drug of journalism. Once you get into it and you see what you can do, where this can go, where it can lead, then other maybe harder things for students with weaker writing skills, they can use those audio recordings to shape their stories. So I always have my students, whenever they do an interview, record the interview so they can write the story and turn it into a podcast episode.
That's really cool, because I really struggle with writing. Like I can talk all day. Like I'm happy talking in the scribe, but like writing, I'm just like I don't know. Like I struggle a lot, and I feel like it's easier to talk, and like once you get comfortable with someone, like you can actually talk and stuff like that. But like it's harder when you're like just there, like, okay, write a paper, and I'm like, okay, and like you take forever to like get your ideas out because you don't know how to like write it.
Well, and there's so many. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say there's so many like mental blocks when you're writing and you're just like judging every sentence you write. But yeah, when you're
Yeah,
recording audio, like it's just well, what you said is what you said, and you
yeah,
can't go back
exactly.
and edit it. But it's nice to it just kind of gets you to kind of loosen up and just go for it.
Yeah, that's what I found, and since then I'm a big fan. We called them sound portraits, so they were kind of like profiles where they would interview actually a classmate or actually anyone they wanted to, and then but it's the pushing. Like interviews are guided by a goal. You want to kind of pull back the layers. They're kind of like an onion. And what I found is that journalism students tend to, especially at that level, be really kind of reluctant to ask kind of probing questions like, where are you from? Oh, so you're from Venezuela. Well, what made you come here? Like you start going down a path.
Yeah.
And you get them warmed up and you get them more experienced doing that, then that really helps. So.
Okay. What advice would you give someone that wants to try to do a podcast or like get into like a podcast? Like, what is your main advice?
I would say just know that it is going to take a lot of time and work. You think like, oh, I'll spend an hour recording and an hour editing, but really you end up spending a ton of time preparing and, doing research. And I'm a huge perfectionist, so I spend way too much time editing. So do something that you really care about, something that you want to spend hours and hours thinking about and listening to and talking about. Because it is something that's a lot of work, but if it's something that you're passionate about, then it's also really fun.
Yeah, I wrote start small and go big. So start with things and then from there you can build and go on in different areas. So starting a podcast, you're going to have to start small. There's episode 0, which is where you're kind of laying out the episodes or at least the topic, the guiding things. And I think if you can just start with like a focus, right, and then start identifying people who you want to talk to in that focus, then. But I think just starting small, just you talk to the people and then have those people lead you to other people. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be polished and amazing. Editing and interviewing people take time, so it's kind of a situation where you're going to make a lot of mistakes and then learn from those mistakes, which is probably the most rewarding. Those questions didn't lead anywhere. I need to kind of reformat them, or I need to guide the person into a different area or something. So that's my advice. I actually a really good book. I totally recommend this. I actually printed it out. I don't have the book on me. It's actually on campus. It's called Out on the Wire. It's by Jessica Abel. And it's the storytelling secrets of the new masters of radio. It's a forward with Ira Glass. It's actually it's a graphic novel. It's a comic book, and it's fantastic. And they give you really good tips for storytelling, how to develop the arcs and the pacing and that kind of thing. And they also talk about how they went through, their own experiences setting up podcasts. So it's called Out on the Wire. It's like $15 on Amazon. I wish I was looking for it. I thought I had it here, but it's actually in my office on campus. So that is something that when I was setting up the reporting class and the assignments for that, I needed to, so when you do a podcast, the how you tell the story can be told in different ways, the actual structure of it.
Yeah.
And so they actually lay that out, the different structures. So, a conventional story will, have you climb to some sort of conflict or, peak and then falling action, right? But in a podcast, there can be like Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, or the structure changes. And so this book really helped me because I know how to write and I know how to do other things, but when I got to having the students doing the sound portraits, I wanted them to do it in a way where the structure was coherent, and then they just add on meat on those bones. So that really helped me.
Listening to a ton of podcasts has been so helpful for me too, because there's so many people who've been podcasting for years, and you can just learn a lot from the tone and the different structures that they use, and so that's been really helpful for me to get inspiration as well.
Yeah, there's Radiolab has their own structure. This American Life has their own structure, and actually, I should have printed out. There's they call it the napkin structures, and it's this guy who sketched out the different structures. I don't know if Natalia, you saw this, but it's like This American Life is Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, like 3 dashes. Radiolab. I'll have to look it up. Each podcast has a different structure, and if you can follow those structures and listen, that's a great advice. Just listening to podcasts to see how other people do it, and then finding one that you enjoy doing in a similar way.
Cool. This question is directed to Natalia. You shared with us about Culture Clash. Can you tell us more, like you already talked about how it kind of got started, but can you tell us more about what kind of conversations or topics you talk about in Culture Clash?
Yeah, yes, like I mentioned, it kind of came out of my final portfolio project, and then I worked with my committee chair, Dr. Jillian Silverman, and then at the chair of the English department, Dr. Philip Joseph. And basically, it's been a lot of experimentation, which is something that I've been really enjoyed about the podcast. So every single episode, we've done something different. So we started out with an episode on the series The Handmaid's Tale, and I did a series of interviews with different professors on campus. And then our second episode we did on the films of Jordan Peele, because I just love horror film and just think that he's doing something really interesting. And we did that as a series of interviews as well. And then, like I mentioned, our Best Films of 2019 episode it has been one of my favorites to work on so far, because we just got a panel of students together, and we just grabbed a cup of coffee and just talked about our thoughts on every single Oscar-nominated movie. And it was so fun, and we just had a lot of laughs, and it was such an engaging conversation. So something that I've really enjoyed about this podcast is that we try out a different structure every time and see what works. And but really at the core of it, it's always just having those in-depth discussions, or talking about the media that we're consuming and what it has to say about society, and why is it that we're connecting to certain types of media. So it's been a really fun project.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then Daniel, questions for you. Can you talk more about what kind of stories you have talked about and Bird on the Wire, that your students have talked about that you have found really intriguing?
Yeah, so with Bird on the Wire, it follows the same topic focus as the magazine. Each semester we publish the magazine. Last semester we did for the magazine Humans of CCD, and so the stories of humans, or all the students, right? So it was really broad, right? This semester, the focus for the magazine was side hustles. So Lyft drivers, event planning, just bazillion side hustles. And then I got talking to some of my students about this idea of side hustles, because I wanted to see, what kind of side hustles they did, right? And the range of side hustles is just incredible. I mean, we had, I wrote down, I can talk about more of these later, but Confessions of a Rideshare Driver, and that was, talking about this adventure. And that one was interesting because the student, he was a Lyft driver, and we were talking about podcasting and setting up a podcast focused on confessions of a Lyft driver, right?
Yeah.
And the initial idea was he would interview his passengers.
Yeah.
And, because you guys have ridden Lyft or Uber or something like that. You get crazy. I've never driven for them, but I've ridden, and you get crazy drivers, and I'm sure they see, slice of, Denver life, incredible. Yeah. So initially we were going to just have him interview his passengers. They got a 20-minute trip. It'd make for a perfect, he could record. But then he was worried that Lyft wouldn't like that, or he would get into trouble. So we had to evolve, right? And we went through probably 2 evolutions as I'm talking to him more and more about his experiences. We end up with that one. He actually tells me a story where he was so as a Lyft driver, you can rent the cars, and sometimes you actually need to take a Lyft to get to your car, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so he had to get an Uber or a Lyft to his rental Uber, if that makes sense. And he had a 3-day adventure with this Uber driver. He just hit it off with this guy, and then spent the next 3 days with him. And so it's a whole thing. And then I had students who they were interested in mental health and the side hustles with people who struggle with mental health. So, there are certain things they can do or certain times they can't do things. And so side hustles might be a way of overcoming those disabilities. And there's other ones I can talk about. I think we have it listed as another question, but I think where you're going with it is the influence it had on the students. I got to know my students a lot better just by interviewing them and asking them questions about their interest in the podcast and in these different episodes.
Yeah. One of the audience asked, what is the best software you guys use to edit or even do your podcast on?
You can go ahead.
So if you're just getting started, definitely Audacity is the best editing software because it's free. So if you're just testing it out, if you don't really have a budget to be spending on software, that's a really good place to start. And the interface is maybe not kind of as shiny as some paid ones, but it definitely gets the job done. And we use SoundCloud as our hosting service, but there are really so many options for hosting. It's definitely worth doing some research.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I mean, I started talking about how podcasts are just a web page and with audio files. So you need a place to host it. But Natalia's right. I mean, there's just a lot of different free options out there. What we're doing at CCD is we have a WordPress website, and any WordPress website, you can add a plugin, a podcast plugin, where you can publish your episodes. And so for us, it made sense just to have it all on one site because it's just a web page, and every time we post an episode, it would just show up as a new entry. To edit, Natalia again is right. Audacity is open, free, open source, free, really accessible. It's what I teach in my classrooms. You can take all the ums and uhs, like the vocal fillers I'm using, take that all out and make it more polished and cut out stuff. I'm trying to think. Adobe Creative Cloud has their sound editing program. I sometimes use QuickTime. I have a MacBook, and so I use QuickTime to do audio recordings. Somewhere in the comments or in the questions, they asked a related question about using an iPhone to record. And you can definitely just use the voice. That's actually that's what, when I have the students do interviews, they use their iPhones or Android phones to do the recording. The only issue is that the format that they record in is it's called M4A or MPEG-4.
Yeah.
And you can just Google and you can convert that to MP3 or a different audio format. So it's all really accessible. The students in my class use iPhones. They record, I have them convert it, and then they edit in Audacity. There is a CCD, this is mainly targeted at CCD students who are listening. At CCD, we have an editing software called WeVideo. It's a wevideo.com. And so we have a special arrangement with WeVideo for doing audio editing and video and that kind of thing. So the CCD students use that. It's just the same idea as Audacity. Audacity is usually my go-to. I know with the Mac, there's some compatibility issues with Audacity with the recent OS update, but they'll fix that, and Audacity will be awesome again. So
we also have on the Culture Clash blog, I've been writing a little bit about podcasting for beginners, and we have a list there on tips as well on some equipment to get you started. So you can find that at cultureclash.com.
Yeah. Just to tag on real quick, the cool thing with podcasting is that you can start out with your phone, right? And you can quickly go up to more advanced and equipment. We're getting at CCD, we're getting like an actual soundboard with multiple mics and arms and stuff like that to actually set up more of a studio. But you don't need it. That's not a requirement to getting started. You can just simply start out with your phones and Audacity, so you can scale up pretty quickly.
Another question the audience had was, are podcasts an effective way to get news, or like how reliable are news podcasts?
I'll let you take it as the journalism professor.
I'll do my best here. So the first part, I think, was our podcast news. Yeah. I think the difference is that it's not breaking news, or it's not, it's more like a magazine, right? You read a magazine when you have time, right? No one's, buying magazines because they want to find out, the breaking news. It's kind of a leisurely thing. You're kind of paging through the magazine. Same thing with a podcast. You're kind of listening to it when you have time. But it's just the medium. And Natalia pointed out earlier accurately that you can put anything into that podcast. So you could have a breaking news podcast, but it would be not breaking news, but a podcast that is, more in-depth news or something like that. You're telling the story behind the news or what is happening. And then I forgot, what was the other part? Should we trust it? What's that?
How reliable?
Yeah. I mean, podcasts are to be taken with the same credibility bit of salt that any website. You need to be aware of the bias factor. I think they're alluding to the bias factor. Yeah. There's like a bell curve of, very unreliable, like Fox News is very unreliable. InfoWars, very unreliable. Very, they're not credible at all. And then you have, news sources that attempt to be neutral. And some people like to dismiss all news sources as, like a president does, fake news or something like that. But the reality is there is a sizable, the majority of news is credible. Whether or not they are biased and they tend to go right or left, you can find out by looking on this bias chart. Just Google bias chart. So I would say, but yeah, I would say, yeah, they're credible. They're, I think you have to realize someone has put a lot of effort into it, but it's just like YouTube and other media. You have to be kind of, skeptical and see, whether or not they are actually credible.
Yeah, I would say the same way you do when reading news, just kind of check on those sources, and all the major, news organizations are making podcasts now, like the Daily, from the New York Times, and, just making sure that they're citing sources and they're telling you where this information came from.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. And then this question is for both of you, or whichever wants to answer. How do you think podcasts can help right now with everybody practicing like social distancing and like keeping us like connected?
I mean, I think definitely one thing we're all missing from human interaction is just like hearing other people's voices. And there's just something so personal about putting in your headphones and listening to a podcast that can make you feel really connected. And there's so many podcasts right now just doing a lot of great storytelling and just people talking about how they're doing and how they're coping. And it's just a really nice way to remember that you're not in this alone, and that a lot of people, that we're all going through it together at the same time. And so I have found it a really nice way to kind of remember that and stay connected.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just a means of connecting, and hearing from other people who are we're all in this together. And so hearing stories from other people. Here in my part of Colorado, on the west side of Denver, we have people who, I don't know if you hear this at 8:00 in your areas, where they start howling or setting off fireworks or something at 8. At least over here, it's big. Everyone starts howling. I howl. I won't do that now. I'll save you guys. But, no. So it's that's what's so cool about audio, is that you're able to transmit a feeling of connectedness just by howling, right? And I think in other parts of the world, they have different ways of doing this. There's, I think New York has the clapping. Everyone claps at a certain time, and it's the same idea. It's in a way, it's a kind of a podcast. It's episodic, and it's a way of connecting just through audio, which is just so cool. You just see or hear people howling, and you feel a little bit like, hey, we're in this together, and I'm not as alone or isolated. So I think there, you could see me shift gears there. One thing I did want to mention is that there's such a rich library of podcasts that you can easily find a topic that you're into in this library. There's something for everyone here. And you might even find something locally, people who share the same passions as you, just through podcasts, through this means.
Well, leading with that, do you guys have a specific podcast you guys listen to or like recommend right now that like you're like very intrigued?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of like kind of the current situation, a podcast that I've been really enjoying is Home Cooking, and that is by Samin Nosrat, who wrote the book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and she did the Netflix series of the same name, and Rishi Hiraway, who's created a lot of amazing podcasts, including Song Exploder, and they're just taking people's questions about like, what do I do with all these dried beans? How do I cook it? How do I make something interesting? How do I make a recipe when I don't have flour? What are the best frozen vegetables to buy? And it's been a really fun podcast to listen to, just hearing people's stories and kind of like what they have in their cupboard, and then just having this great expert, Samin Nosrat, like giving you all these recommendations on what to cook. And she's also really fun and has a wonderful laugh. So I've been really enjoying that.
Yeah, I enjoy the Serial podcast. It's kind of an oldie but goodie. I think they're in season 3 now. And that one is, I think, has gotten a lot of people into podcasting or interested, is the Serial. And then a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend or something does this cozy podcast. And I haven't listened to it yet, but it's on my bucket list. And they're talking about it's a woman. She's talking about all the, everyone's sheltering in place or at home and how to make the home cozy. And so everything from like cozy cocktails to cozy shows to watch, like if you're watching Netflix or something. So that one is I think once the semester ends, I'm going to pick that one up.
One more that has just always been a favorite of mine and is especially helpful right now is Dear Hank and John, which is created by brothers Hank and John Green. And, they've been YouTubers since 2007. And so they just have a lot of experience in like creating an online community that's like really positive and inclusive and like has a variety of perspectives. And I think that's really important right now because we're moving so much of our life online to listen to them and be really thoughtful about how to create an online community that just kind of respects everyone and welcomes everyone in. So they've been a nice kind of other way to stay connected right now.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The audience asked if there has been, like right now, like have you guys been listening more to podcasts since we're social distancing than before?
I haven't. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I haven't. I've been kind of in the crunch of towards the end of the semester with getting stuff done. So I haven't been listening to podcasts. We've been trying to kind of develop the Bird on the Wire podcast, but we right now, even though we're social distancing, the schoolwork is still still a lot of that going on. I feel like I'm actually working harder now at home than I did, before. So, but once the semester ends and I have some more time, then yeah, definitely I will listen to more podcasts.
I think something that's been kind of cutting down on podcast listening time is that I don't have my usual commute to work.
But,
but yeah, I definitely have been. I feel like trying out more like different podcasts because I kind of have my routine ones that I always listen to. So I've been like checking out a little bit more different ones during this time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I usually take the light rail in, and that would be my go-to time for listening to audiobooks and podcasts and stuff like that. And now I feel like I'm just always at the office. So I need to maybe just pretend I'm going on a commute and then listen to the podcast.
Cool. Yeah, that was me too. I would always be like listening to Netflix or some audiobooks before, like while going on the train, and now I'm just like I don't even pay attention anymore. Like I just put it like to have like some noise in the background because I'm used to it. That's mostly it.
Yeah, I agree.
Another this question is for both of you guys. Do you have other recommendations? Of any fun podcast that students will feel like connected to, even though we're supposed to stay like at home? Like any like more like comedian wise or like conspiracy like stuff like that you guys listen to that you guys would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite comedy podcasts is How Did This Get Made? And that's created by comedians Paul Scheer, June Diane Raphael, and Jason Mantzoukas. And basically they talk about really bad, terrible movies. But it's such a fun podcast. They're all just so funny. And, a lot of times they end up actually really liking the movies, even though everyone thinks it's bad. But it's just kind of I don't know, it's just a feeling of just hanging around with your friends and just making fun of something and laughing together. And that's one of my favorite podcasts.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I love stand-up comedy, and I don't have the podcast in front of me, but the comedy podcasts are excellent. Especially now, we need a little bit of comedy, a little levity with this whole social distancing.
Cool. Okay, and then we're gonna go to more like specific questions that the audience is asking.
Okay.
This is for Natalia. Between the two podcasts, between Culture Clash and like discussing culture ideas, and Madeline Looks Back, discussing the female gaze, how do you often like overlap them like between each other, like with the topics and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think because they are both, at the end of the day, podcasts about media, I can a lot of times, use the research that I did for The Handmaid's Tale for an episode of Madeline Looks Back. There's definitely a lot of opportunities for overlap. I try to keep the topics themselves separate, so like the actual movies and shows, so that I'm kind of not just talking about the same thing all the
Yeah.
time. But it is nice to have that overlap because I can get a lot of ideas from something that we did for Culture Clash, like, oh, maybe we can try this on Madeline Looks Back. But they are kind of different experiences producing them as well because I am the sole producer on Culture Clash, whereas I have a co-producer and co-host on Madeline Looks Back, so it can be a little bit more like back and forth and a little bit more conversational. But then it's good to kind of have experience in these both like different ways of creating podcasts.
Yeah. I just want to interject. So you, Natalia, you enjoy having a co-host?
I do. I really do. And
Yeah.
I mean, I always have guests on Culture Clash as well because I think just conversation is really at the heart of it. It just makes it dynamic. And,
Yeah.
I don't want to hear myself just talking for an hour. So I don't think anyone else wants to hear that either.
Well, and you get that play of back and forth, that
Yeah.
in real time or during the interview. Yeah, I like that as well. That's actually what I want to set it up with two students kind of act as hosts, because I think just having one student be a host might be a lot, but if there's two, then I think it will go better.
And so many of the great podcasts, like My Favorite Murder and Reply All, like really what people come back to is not necessarily like the information itself, but that relationship between those two hosts and that kind of fun banter, and you kind of feel like they're your friends as well. And I think that really makes it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, going off that, is it hard to find topics to talk about after a while, or does it come like easy, or like you said, like sometimes you can use one for another one, but like in general, like is it hard to find topics to talk about?
Honestly, for me, no, because I just love TV and movies so much that I'm always like excited to talk about the new show that I just watched.
Okay.
I think for me, so I interviewed the Lyft driver for Confessions of a rideshare driver, and it wasn't so much we had an issue coming up with topics, but when you interview someone, you're kind of feeling them out, like what is this person about? Where could the story be? In journalism, we're trying to answer the so what, like why is this person important? And so I kept I'm keeping that in the back of my mind as I'm interviewing, and so it takes a while for that to blossom, come out, and it will come out, but I think it's not so much a matter of coming up with a topic, but talking to them long enough where you start to see an angle or how their experience is connected to the focus of the topic. And so like that interview was like an hour long or something. It was really long. In the first part, there's like, you're looking for the bits of gold in quotes that they might say or something like that. And so I think when you go back and edit, that's where it becomes kind of overwhelming. Like, oh my gosh, this is an hour of audio, or and the topics you can go. There's so many different ways that the story could go. So you kind of have to really decide what your angle is and where the story should go. So
we have another audience question. How much time on like the average do you guys take on editing and like publishing the episode of like that you have just recorded?
Go ahead, Natalia.
Yeah, for me, it really depends because I do tend to talk about TV shows and movies. There's the time of watching that, so I've learned not to pick really long series that have tons and tons of episodes because then I'm like binging in 1 week, like trying to catch every episode. But I would say for Culture Clash, probably like 20 hours per episode because I am doing a variety of different interviews and I do a ton of research and there's a lot of work up front. And with the structure of Culture Clash, like I typically kind of take snippets of the interviews and kind of slot them into the topic that just kind of organize it by topic and outline it that way and kind of slot the interviews in that way. And that does take quite a long time to edit. Whereas for Madeline Looks Back, we just have the conversation and we pretty much play the conversation in full and just kind of cut out little bits where, I don't know, we just got confused and started joking or taking out all the little ums and ahs. So that tends to be a quicker process. So it definitely depends on kind of the format that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's totally, it's completely about the format. So, you know, like when we're doing a sound portrait, it could actually go pretty quickly because, you know, you're just trying to get a sense, you're trying to paint a picture using audio of this person. So for example, one student did a story about her mom, who's a programmer. And since it's a sound portrait, we pull in natural sound. So keyboard clacking or, you know, tapping, that kind of thing, or office noise, or we're trying to create this audioscape. And so selecting natural sound or finding natural sound to do that, you know, it just takes time. I think the student had trouble coming up, kind of focusing, because they kept straying off and couldn't decide on what the story was actually about. And I think that's the I think for me, or for what we're doing over at CCD, that's the hard part, is that we're trying to tell a story and answer that question. And if you can't, then you're kind of spinning your wheels, and it can go in a lot of different directions. And they kind of struggled for a while trying to produce the bit, just simply because they didn't have a focus. They couldn't answer the so what. Like, why are we learning about this woman, or why are we trying to hear about her story? But I would say the length, that Natalia is right on with the amount of time. And I think for us, there's also just some obstacles with training students on how to edit and how to look for quotes and, you know, kind of do that bits. So it's a little bit longer.
Even though like I have never done a podcast, so I'm learning how to edit videos like for YouTube, and it does take a really long time since like I'm a beginner. So I understand like having to edit like something for like almost 5 hours and like about to give up, but like you're almost like finished.
Yeah.
So a perfectionist, so like it takes me forever to edit videos because I want everything to be like perfect.
Well, and editing video is harder because you have the picture and the audio. So you're doing like double the work. You have to make sure the visual picture tells a story and the audio works. There's nothing worse than you know, seeing a picture and the audio's all jacked up and messed up. So you're doing a lot more work. I think just as audio editing, it's you're sorting through a lot of a conversation you had. So and you're trying to structure the story. So if you already have the structure in place, then it's just a matter of plugging in the pieces. But if you don't know what it's going to be, then you're kind of building as you go. So
I'm a big fan of outlining for that reason.
That's why I mentioned the napkin structure earlier, because once you realize that's the structure you're trying to go for, or you've picked a structure, then you can just plug in the pieces that put flesh on those bones.
Okay. So we're on our last question, and this is directed to Dan. Before we wrap up things, can you tell us some more crazy side hustles that students have done? So these are all stories that that students were working on before the virus hit. So we had Confessions of a Rideshare Driver. I talked about that a little bit.
and it's this 3-day adventure. There's this Uber driver who calls himself Black Jesus, and it's a story in 3 parts or 3 acts, where they meet, and this character Black Jesus is just he says he's in the Marine Corps and he used to fly planes, and he's just a liar, and like he just tells lies and lies and lies. But this the student who interviewed or who went out along on this adventure spent 3 days with this guy, kind of meeting with him, coming back, spending, going out to the bar and it's like this total like moment, rising action and then falling action, where the pinnacle action, they're at the bar, and he pulls a knife. The Black Jesus character pulls a knife on the student's friend, and things quickly, and from there, like no one was hurt, but it's like I was interviewing this guy, and I just got sucked into the story. I mean, who is this guy? He's such a guy, like such a character. So that was one. Going Mental, that was, I think I talked about that, about there was a nurse who worked night hours because she had mental health issues. And then another student was doing an episode in this Going Mental about Twitch. Are you guys familiar with Twitch? It's like it's sort of like YouTube, but for gaming and streaming, that kind of thing. And they used Twitch as sort of both a side hustle, right? You can make money doing this, and as sort of a touch point, for a touchstone for mental health issues. So they formed a community around this Twitch channel. There's Sean and his 4 groovy books. Did you guys ever read Pete the Cat? It's like a children's book. There's this, Sean is a CCD student who reads to volunteers reading at the library. Cakewalk, that was a story about event planning as a side hustle. Sneakerhead side hustle, that's a huge thing at CCD, and I'm sure not just CCD, but on the tri-campus as well, is reselling sneakers. Have you guys heard of this?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
You've heard of it? It's huge. I actually want to do it just so I can have the experience, because you buy a shoe for like $200, and then you resell it for $1,200. I mean, it's like Yeezys and all these like crazy popular shoes. And there's that's a whole side hustle that a lot of students do, is reselling these shoes. They call them sneakerheads. And then the last one that I'll talk about is, I've been calling it Silk Stockings. And it was about a student whose friend in New York was a professional escort. And so she did that as her side hustle. And she was going to this is where the virus kind of hit, because she was going to interview this other woman, and everything kind of hit with the virus and kind of fell apart. So what I'm hoping is that, I mean, these are really good stories, and some of them are in different stages of development and editing, is that we can still, overcome the challenge of the virus and actually get these podcast episodes out, because I'm sold on the story. And I mean, like the first one about Black Jesus, that one, it's going to take some editing and figuring it out, but they're all interesting in their different ways, and they give a really interesting story about side hustles and these students who who do these side hustles, and so just kind of a lot of interesting things going on with that.
Cool. Well, we have reached the end. Thank you so much for being here and able to talk to us about like how podcasts work and like telling us about your experiences. And like thank the audience as well for joining us and like giving these questions to make the conversation keep flowing. As well as a reminder, please remember that the tri-institutional events will continue to host events during this time to keep us online and connected. As well as today, we're talking and expressing our podcast media. Another way we can let our voice be heard is through participating in SGA elections, and they're taking online. So like you will be receiving email. So they're all open until now, until April 26th. And then thank you again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful time for wonderful day. And then thank you guys for being here and like helping us with like us getting more knowledge about podcasts and like all the things you can do with podcasts.
Thanks for having us. If I can add one quick thing, is that for our fourth episode of Culture Clash, we are accepting stories from the CU Denver community about what you're doing to kind of get through this time, and what you're watching, what you're making, and you can send those to cultureclashucd@gmail.com.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Okay.